It's no secret that game developers are crazy about pumping out roguelite games, and just like any other oversaturated genre, not all titles are created equal. The first game I reviewed on this channel was Dead Cells, and it's been quite a bit since I've put a review out. Since this style of video is really the only kind of video that I was requested to continue making, I decided to tackle another entry in the same genre to tell you why you should, or maybe shouldn't, invest your time and money into it. Today we're having a look at a product from Digital Sun Games. My name is Squash, and this is Moonlighter. Moonlighter's graphics are middle of the road, I suppose. It has a pixel-based art style, and it's cute. It reminds you a bit of the Game Boy days. And I would say it's very reminiscent of the Legend of Zelda Minish Cap. It's bright, every area has a distinct color palette, but it still feels pretty uninspired at times. The town of Renoka's design harkens back to Stardew Valley, and is decent enough. The final two areas of the game are distinct and interesting to look at, but so much of the game is just dull. And this is a problem, given that the game is having you run through these levels over and over again. Dull environments sometimes result in dull gameplay. I understand that levels are procedurally generated, but if they were just a bit more complicated and maybe a bit more vibrant, I think I would have enjoyed it a bit more. Despite this, there are some enemies in the game that are interestingly designed. The characters all have distinct appearances, and the bosses in the game don't feel uninspired in their design with the exception of the Desert Guardian. Let's face it, devs, a worm or a snake on a desert level isn't what I would call groundbreaking. The inside of the titular shop, the Moonlighter, is also aesthetically pleasing. The in-game decorations don't change much, but it really feels like the kind of shop Link would wander into while trying to break his fishing record or whatever that elf does over in Hyrule. Not to mention the weapon designs, which are definitely inspired and interesting, but unfortunately sort of evened out by the uninspiring aesthetic of the armor in the game. Are there any eyesores? No, absolutely not. And the game does have quite a few decent sprites and locations. Does the game at times feel lacking in artistic inspiration? Yes. And this feeling is prevalent a bit too often to give it a score that would be considered high. The game does a serviceable job graphically, and for that I'll give it a 7 out of 10 in this category. Moonlighter is a game devoid of voice acting, which isn't really a surprise for a game in this genre. Its music, however, is absolutely top of the line. The game has run-of-the-mill combat sounds, but it's a roguelite. I didn't really anticipate anything groundbreaking on the front of combat sounds. I'd like to mention that all of the background music in this video is from the game's OST, and for good reason. It's ambient, it's atmospheric, and goddamn, it's good. Is the game's music repetitive? Yes. And, of course, it's a roguelite. The game's music is going to be repetitive because repetition is the nature of the game. This is why the quality of the music is so important. Just like each area having a distinct color palette, each area sort of feels like it has a musical palette as well, and this provides atmospheric weight that helps even out the game's lack of visual artistic inspiration at times. Is the whole soundtrack a 10 out of 10 straight across? No, but a solid chunk is an 11 out of 10. To be honest, my favorite piece is probably Dreams of Adventures, which is not even in the game. It's a bonus track on the game's OST. I'll link it in the description below. And like I said, it's not perfect, but any tiny issues are more than made up for. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 10 out of 10 in this category. Just a quick warning, spoilers ahead. I'll put the time code on the screen so you know where to skip if you're just looking for the score without the spoilers. Dead Cells, the other game in this genre I've reviewed, lost points because it was lacking in a story. This game at the very least has a story, but I don't know that much more can be said about it that's positive other than one thing. Now, what are my gripes? Well, the writers of this game broke one of the golden rules of writing. Show, don't tell. And basically what this means, if you're unfamiliar with the concept, is that if you're writing a story, like a book, let's say you're writing a book, you want to show plot details to your reader through action as opposed to exposition. You don't want to kind of drown them in explanation when you could be walking them through the story still. Now, I understand that video games are an amalgamation of other art forms, and perhaps the story wasn't paramount to the experience the developers were looking to provide. But this game's story does get a little bit frustrating. The vast majority of the setup comes from one character, Xenon, a sort of parental figure to the main character whose name is Will, after his grandfather has passed away. Xenon is a rather frustrating character, because what he provides is both so important and so incorrectly done that I can't help but want to slap him right in the beard. Xenon's exposition about Will's grandfather should have been a bit more visceral, visual, perhaps a cutscene, something that makes us feel for the main character a little bit. Will is a silent protagonist, and that's already more difficult to relate to as opposed to somebody who can talk and express themselves. We have little to no understanding of Will's personal motivations and how they contrast with what Xenon wants him to do. The game is described on its official wiki page as a rogue-lite game about a shopkeeper that dreams of becoming a hero. But when I venture into these dungeons, I don't feel like that's the motivator. I feel like I'm just there to do business as usual. Defeat guardians and get money. Like I just said, the protagonist has a dead grandfather, and this should tie into the game's plot more. You can't just play the familial death card and then not run with that shit. Vengeance might be a tired motivator, but at least it's a motivator. And Will, our silent money-making hero, could use some kind of thirst for vengeance in this story, or some kind of visceral, emotional motivation. So the game is definitely a rinse and repeat for about 90% of its runtime, which is typical of roguelite gameplay, but I don't think it should be typical of its storytelling. Walk in dungeon, beat boss, listen to worried old man complain and suggest shopkeeping instead, as though I don't have to go into the dungeons, in the direction of the guardians to get the artifacts that make me the money. And then the ending comes. And here's another spoiler alert for those of you dinguses who are still watching that haven't seen the end yet. You've been warned. This ending absolutely threw me for a loop. Will and everybody in that village being complicit in dirty, slimy thievery, because those dungeons aren't just dungeons, they're built on the fragments of other dimensions, and that they learn this because some intergalactic law enforcement officers show up. I can seldom believe the string of words that just came out of my mouth. I could seldom believe what was on my screen when I beat the game. When the fuck did the devs decide to just go all M. Night Shyamalan on my ass? Not that I'm complaining, but you are completely and totally full of shit if that twist didn't catch you off guard. There was an exchange at the end of the game that I think was ripped straight from one of the meetings the devs had while discussing how they wanted to end the game. That has to have been an actual conversation, and it made it into the game anyway. Good on you for whoever pitched Dimensional Pirates, for sticking to your guns. Because this whole prospect of dimensional trade sets up a metric ton of room for endgame content, or dare I say, a sequel. The ending level, if you read all of the tablets that explain where you are and who you're fighting, that level even ties into your first adventure into the dungeons. I don't get caught off guard too often by video game plots, but this was a pleasant surprise. It would have been a 5 or 6 out of 10 if not for that twist. I'm giving you a 7.5 for those balls of steel. Moonlighter might look like a Game Boy Advance Zelda game, but does it handle like one? Yes. And I'm not going to come out here and say that Moonlighter's gameplay is perfect. But let's go ahead and marvel for a second at the concept. An RPG where you balance a life as a shopkeeper, who actually, works on his shop, works at his shop, and doubles as a hero. That might not sound horribly groundbreaking, but it was such a breath of fresh air. in a world so jam-packed with heroes that were chosen by gods or some other crap about destiny and fate. In this game, Will was destined to be a shopkeeper and chose to be a hero. I like that, but how does that basis translate into gameplay? Firstly, let's go ahead and talk about the game's combat and movement. The character attacks in 4 directions but can move diagonally, so it really does handle a lot like a Game Boy Advance Zelda game in this regard. I played using an Xbox 360 USB controller. It handled extremely well. The combat is intuitive, and while most enemies have obvious exploits, it's still very easy to take damage and often impossible to avoid. But, despite this, the game is just too easy. If you want an experience that is even remotely hard, you'll want to play the game on its hardest difficulty. The game tells you that the base difficulty, the recommended difficulty, is hard, and that's not hard, trust me. The bosses are a cakewalk, and the dungeons are extremely easy to navigate, which is definitely something that I would say was underwhelming. Now on the shopkeeping front, I think the game shows both the most potential and has the most faults. Things like being able to decorate the shop, upgrading the facility, getting an assistant that you don't even have to pay or provide insurance for, dealing with thieves, and adjusting prices based on your consumers is all fantastic. The problem is that the shopkeeping is also just too easy. I absolutely love that the game utilizes supply and demand, but there are a lot of other variables in economics. It seems like every character in the game has like fuck you money, and that's just not the way that the real world works. Not every NPC should be able to come in and drop 100 grand on a book. But lo and behold, that's what they do. The game takes notes of NPCs that shop for specific purposes or occupations, but it doesn't take note of different economic classes. And that would be a very interesting way to incentivize players to balance the kind of goods they put out. The other aspect of the shop that I believe could have been handled better is the quest point at the desk. So when you get to shop level 2, customers can come in and request that you fetch specific items for them. The profit margins on the items look great until you realize the amount of work that you're putting in for them. On more than one occasion, I found myself being requested to go to dungeons that I had already beaten to fetch them the items, which just seems counterproductive to me. Counterproductive, at least, until the very end of the game, where this could serve as very good endgame content. Unfortunately, after you beat the game, the only real people that the endgame currently caters to are people who are obsessed with completing every achievement. So how would I fix this quest point to appeal to people who are still playing the game? Well, first I would make it into more of a luxury for the NPC, and I would add some risk and reward. I would cut down on the NPCs that ask you to go on these searches, and have the player search for items that are more scarce. Then I would significantly bump up the profit for the player's work, and lastly, you want to incentivize the completion of the quest. How would you incentivize the completion of the quest, you ask? Well, in the real world, not completing an order that you promised could and should damage your reputation. Maybe that means that the NPC shows up to your store and they don't get their item, and then for a few days, maybe they talk some crap, less people come through your shop. I think the Moonlighter having a reputation that the player needs to uphold is a great way the devs could improve the game, especially given that one of the people that you bring into town is literally your direct competition. This could also make for a variety of interactions with Xenon and other NPCs. It could make the world feel just a bit more alive. Now, I would say the gameplay is pretty solid overall, with just a few flaws and a ton of room for improvement. But all of these issues together create an even worse problem, and that's that the game is just too short. I was going to penalize the story for this issue, but I feel this is more a result of the gameplay being too easy, as opposed to the story being too straightforward. On my first playthrough, I played on hard, the recommended game mode, and I beat the game in 12 hours, not bad. Moved on to New Game Plus, and then I beat the game in 8 hours. Then, on a new save file, I upped the difficulty of the game to very hard, and I beat the game in under 5 hours. The gameplay feels fantastic, but is hurt by a lack of difficulty. Despite this, I'm going to give the game an 8 out of 10 in this category because of just how fun the game actually is to play. I think that the quality of the game really outweighs some of the bad, and that if this game is changed to be more difficult and endgame content is added, this could become a 10 out of 10 in no time. So the final score is a 32.5 out of 40 possible points, which is about a B- percentage-wise, around 81%. Is it worth the asking price of $20, honestly? I don't know. I don't regret my purchase, but some people have bought this and regretted theirs. I can't argue that it's currently a complete game, but that is subject to change. The devs appear to be hard at work creating more content for the game, and now that the Switch version of the game is out, I'm sure the devs are going to begin focusing on improving their product. This game had no greater issue than its short duration, but this is such a nice problem for this game to have, because it means I want more. I want a more in-depth story involving these characters. I want more intuitive mechanics for the shop, and I want more challenging dungeons to explore, and more perilous bosses to face off with. And even better if that means that I get to experience more fantastic music. This game's strongest feature is the potential of its format, and I sincerely hope Digital Sun gives us more of this experience because I thoroughly enjoyed my time with this game. $20 might be a bit too much for you to justify, so I won't recommend it to most people for its asking price unless they are fans of Zelda-like games or roguelites already. However, if this game is even 25% off on Steam or Humble, I 100% recommend investing your time and money into this game. Thank you, Digital Sun, for providing us with this great little adventure, and I hope to see more from you soon. And thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments, leave a like, maybe drop a sub. I've not uploaded much to this channel, as I've been doing most of my work over on Twitch with the podcast and the streaming. But if there's a demand for more reviews, there will be more reviews. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.